Every pattern that exists in a relationship is co-created. You have a role and they have a role. It's not 100% on them. It's not 100% on you. It's always shared responsibility. So you can never control what somebody else does. Like, you'll never be able to control how somebody shows up or how they respond, but you can always take accountability and take control for how you decide to respond to something. In every situation where you're feeling activated or triggered, or you notice that there's a pattern that's existing and you find yourself pointing the finger at the other person, a much more effective technique would be like, okay, point it in. How am I contributing to this pattern, this cycle that exists between me and my partner? Because it's not you versus them. That's a huge misconception. It's not me versus you. It's me and you versus the pattern. We're on the same team here. How can we both do what we need to in order to dissolve this pattern? And oftentimes that comes down to saying the hard things. The depth of your intimacy is directly proportional to how many uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have with your partner.
In that moment when he said, okay, I have to tell you this thing, and I knew what was coming, and it just really felt like my world was crumbling apart, I also knew that if I were to explode with a huge reaction, how could you do this to me, flip the table over, start, throwing things at him. If I did that, all I would be doing is validating his fear that it's not always safe to tell the truth. Whether or not we stay together, I wanted him to know that being a person of integrity is far more important than piling lies on top of lies on top of lies to get what you want from people.
That was Nimai and Bianca, a couple well known in the nutrition and fitness world who in the last year came out with a podcast episode on their own show called We Are Not Your Couple's Goals, choosing to share some vulnerable relationship experiences that they've had, which led them to working through childhood traumas, healing from infidelity, and showing up for both themselves and their partner. Nimai's bodybuilding career took off after switching from being vegetarian his whole life and never have eaten meat to a 100% plant-based vegan diet in 2015. Motivated by a desire to live as healthy a lifestyle as he can. Nimai is living testimony that you can build incredible strength and muscle without animal foods and be healthy. And Bianca is a vegan fitness influencer who also has a coaching and mentorship business and inspires others in liberation and empowerment all around the world. So together they started touching on other topics and opening up more about their relationship on their own podcast, and I immediately knew I wanted to get them on my show. I love the premise they speak of. Relationships are an opportunity to grow deeper within ourselves. We cover their relationship story, how personal growth is imperative for long-term relationship success, what a conscious relationship is, breaking generational trauma, and how the way we parent creates a ripple effect for our children as they face the world, their advice for healing both personally and within their relationships, how to have healthy communication and resolve conflict in a positive, productive way, creating safe containers for each other during triggering and vulnerable times, openness to grow and heal, and so much more. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I find this topic so meaningful and enriching to our lives. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Thanks so much for coming on this podcast. I'm so excited for this conversation. And I think to start off, I'd love for you guys to share a little bit about why the topic of relationships and healing your traumas to grow together is such an important one for you that you're so passionate about. Like, maybe you can share a little bit about your story, how you guys started out together and what unfolded.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us here. We love talking about this stuff. And we're both passionate about talking about relationships because we've learned so much in the container of our relationship over the past, it's been a little bit over 5 years now. I mean, more than I've learned in all of these other courses that I've done, and I've been in therapy for years, and I've learned so much individually, but together we've been able to just transcend so much pain and trauma and patterns and behavioral things that we had that we didn't like about ourselves that we were able to grow out of. And so that's why we've seen how much it's impacted us, so we've just become really passionate about sharing it with other people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all relationships are a container for growth and a container for reflection. And sometimes it's difficult to grow or learn about yourselves in a vacuum, like with no other person there to reflect these parts of yourself that may be dormant, that become triggered when the right set of circumstances present themselves. So romantic relationships, especially if you think about friendships, like you might get triggered in some ways with friends and people or coworkers or bosses, but romantic relationships are really rooted in our most fundamental like childhood wounds that are related to our parents or our primary caretakers. And when those get activated, it's a whole new set of skills that's required to navigate those. And if you're not taught those things, which not many of us are, we're just learning on the fly, it can be a real challenge to find yourself in the same situation over and over and never be able to transcend that. So luckily, we have a relationship where we're both really committed to working through those really challenging conversations and transcending them and not allowing them to continue to repeat on this cycle. And that's what allowed us to, have so much personal growth, not just, like from a romantic level, but in all other areas of life. We've been able to take these lessons and put it into business, put it into the type of content that we share, put it into our employees and our coworkers, so everything that we do. So that's why we're really passionate about it.
Yeah, and I guess to share a little bit about our story, which we've shared online, so I know you know a little bit about it. We met in 2017, and we had a long distance relationship at first. I was in Florida, Nimai was in California. And so with that start to our relationship, we really just created a best friend bond right away, because there wasn't any physical intimacy right away. It was just long conversations, long FaceTime calls, sending each other pictures all the time, and we really became best friends. And so the first year of our relationship, I moved after 6 months across the country, actually to Long Beach.
No way.
And and that was where we spent the first 2 years together of our relationship. And in those first 2 years, we knew, we thought we knew what we were bringing into the relationship, right? Everyone knows you bring your baggage into the relationship, but we really had so much more that stuff I didn't know I was bringing into the relationship, and same for him. And we began triggering each other as our insecurities started coming out, and we were adapting the only way we knew how, which was just how we saw our parents act, how we've shown up in past relationships, and that's just how we showed up because we didn't know any better. And it wasn't until a couple years in that we had some massive breakthroughs, and that started with us taking the initiative to grow together. And I was in therapy for a while, and then I started having different coaches and mentors, and then we got a coaching container together. And in that coaching container, we really were forced to look at the patterns that we had, which was I was a major people pleaser, and this is something a lot of people do. And we don't realize it, but people pleasing is another form of manipulation. You want somebody to like you or love you, and so you do what you think they want you to do, even though it's not what you want. So everybody's losing because you're not being honest with them and you're not being honest with yourself. So you're making yourself miserable. So whether that was, Nimai wanted to go to the gym and I really wanted to stay home, I would force myself to go to the gym because I thought he wanted to go with me, and really he just needed some space. Like, that's just a little small example of people pleasing, right?
But of just the power of communication.
Exactly. Yeah. And honesty, and truthfulness. And so I was a major people pleaser, and then Nimai had his own not so great patterns around dishonesty and and suppression and hiding things, and that came from his own childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to originally what you said in the beginning about how our what we need to work on and our deepest traumas are best reflected like when we have someone with us is so true, because you can't really, you can work on yourself by yourself, but it's also, there's another layer and a different way to learn about yourself with someone else. And it reminds me of like my kids, because I think it's similar, different obviously, but similar in the fact that like our kids are really our reflections of us. They're little mirrors that show us, they reflect back to us what we're doing. And a lot of times we look at children and we're like, how could they do that? And then if you really take a step back, you realize they learned it from you, that you're the one who's doing that, and that's why they're acting like that. And so same situation with relationships. Like if you're able to open up and be willing to learn about yourself and learn how to grow through seeing what's happening and playing out in your relationship, like that's how you're able to like grow together, bond together, and have a deeper relationship. Because I think a lot of times relationships get in this stuck place where you kind of get in this like, we just fell apart, or we're just not in love anymore. We just grew apart, when really how often, if we just allow ourselves to be willing to grow, if we had those vulnerable communication, it's like conversations and everything that you guys have gone through to be able to grow better together and like grow deeper in love.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there's I mean, this may not be true for everybody, but I've seen it in our relationship, and I've seen it in other friends' relationships as well, is that there comes a point where there's like complacency that happens in the relationship where you both just accept that things are the way they are. And we are both so dedicated towards our own personal growth that doesn't allow space for that to happen in our relationship, because if she's growing, she's learning about herself and showing up in a new way, which then forces me to have to like follow suit or learn about myself and how this is changing me as well. So it's like this constant dance that we're doing where we're both growing and then bringing what we learn into the relationship to deepen the intimacy, because we're constantly getting to know each other. Who we were whenever we first met are completely different versions of ourselves than who we are now 5 years later. And if you're both not on this same growth trajectory, then that gap kind of widens. If one person is growing and the other person is just kind of staying complacent and stagnant, then there's a lot more room for friction, for confrontation, for unhappiness, for all of these different things. So I think growth is a big part of our relationship as well.
Yeah, there's a really common misconception that you need to work on yourself and figure it all out, and then you can meet the love of your life and live happily ever after. And everybody's stories are different. Of course, there are a lot of cases. I have friends who have met each other after they've both done a lot of work. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do work together, but me and Nimai met when we were pretty young, and so the opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves and each other and how to love and how to relate to each other and how to communicate. I mean, our relationship has been the classroom for that. So I don't really believe that you need to work on yourself. You need to fix yourself before you're ready for love, because when you find somebody who's also, has a growth mindset and is really passionate about doing the work and like healing from that deep childhood trauma, the stuff that you don't want to talk about, all that shadowy stuff, when you meet somebody else who wants to do that with you, I mean, they just continue to pull you up and you pull them up. Like what Nimai was saying, you grow a little bit, you pull them up, then they grow a little bit and they pull you up, and then you keep going until you experience a whole new type of living.
Yeah, that growth mindset is so pivotal, and it's really hard if one of the persons in the relationship is all about the growth mindset and the other person is just like, yeah, I'm fine where I'm at. Like, why do we got to do this kind of work, It can be really hard for that couple to be on the same wavelength, because like you said, one's kind of going in this direction, the other, it almost feels like you're kind of getting pulled in the opposite direction when your partner's kind of not growing with you. And Andrew and I had a really young relationship as well. We got together when we were 15 and 16. So we're completely different people than we were when we were 15 and 16. And that's why I think most really young relationships don't last, because you change and you grow, and then you learn, okay, this person's not the right person for me. But for some reason, it could have just been our compatibility. But also it was that we were constantly growing together, and all the best parts of him I was able to take from and learn from him in those ways, and then the best parts of me that I was strong in, he was able to grow and learn from. And as a result, we helped each other to just be the better versions of ourselves as we were getting older.
Yeah.
But so how has your relationship evolved through the traumas that you experienced when you were young, when you started to realize that you needed to work through these things? Like, how did you guys decide or come to that point where you realized that you needed to address those things in your relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, so with our particular situation, when I met Nimai, he had a lot of childhood trauma that he hadn't really faced yet, other than just really gently acknowledging that's there, but it was in the past, and it's in the past, and I can move forward, right? And where I had been actively dealing with my trauma a little bit more through therapy and coaching, and I still had ways to go, and we're both still working on stuff now. I think it's kind of a never-ending journey, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and so we got to a point in our relationship. This was about in 2020, so we were 3.5 years into our relationship, where our relationship was kind of at a standstill, where we were like, okay, we need to either grow or we're not going to be able to stay together. And in that time, that was when Nimai was like, okay, I'm gonna face some of this stuff, and that came with being vulnerable about talking about stuff that he had never talked about before, talking about it with other coaches and mentors and a therapist, and even just by doing that, by being more vulnerable, I was able to understand him better, because I'm like, oh, like now I can see the little boy that felt unsafe or unacknowledged or needed something that he didn't receive, and I know how to not necessarily give that to him, because it's not my responsibility to be his parent, but to support him while he reparents himself. And we did break up, and we took time apart, which was really necessary for our journey, but that was kind of where that started. And then now, you know, still always working through that. Now in 2022, I'm revisiting some of my childhood stuff that I didn't face, and same, Nimai's holding space for me while I'm reparenting that inner child that didn't receive, you know, the love or the care or the safety that she needed. And so that's kind of how I like to look at it. It's not so much of saying, okay, my partner had this horrible childhood trauma, and so they need me to love them, and they need me to take care of them and to be their mommy or be their dad. To rescue them. That's not necessarily good for the relationship, because then it can just create codependency, and it's not actually helping the person transcend that pain, but it's more so creating the space where they can reparent themselves and saying, I love you, I accept you, no matter how much you have to cry over this, how much you need to be held. Do you need me to sit here and be your shoulder? Do you need me to watch a movie with you? Do you need me to go to therapy with you? Whatever, you know, whatever it is for them to strengthen themselves. That's really how you can support that journey.
Yeah. And so can you explain a little bit further into maybe the other parts of your relationship about like the infidelity and how that happened, how you guys grew from that? Because a lot of people, that's like something that people don't really talk about.
Oh, yeah. People don't. And I actually made a post on Instagram talking about, because we've done a couple episodes on both of our podcasts. I made a post on Instagram talking about people don't like to talk about healing from infidelity. People talk about infidelity in the sense of, you know, it's unacceptable when you have a monogamous relationship and that happens, and, you know, moving on. But people don't talk about the healing in the sense of, because whether you decide to start a new relationship with that person or stay together or break up and never speak to them again, that pain of infidelity and your trust being broken, you will take that with you if you don't heal it. So I like talking about healing it, and I mean, we can share a little bit about, for people that are, you know, watching or listening and don't know us.
Don't know your story.
Yeah, don't know our story. So so like I said, after we had been together for 3.5 years, we got to a point where we were like, okay, we need to basically grow or die. Like, there was a lot of stuff coming to the surface, childhood stuff, old stuff. And we were in a container with 2 relationship coaches, and they, you know, said, Bianca, you're a people pleaser, and Nimai, you're not being honest. And somewhere in that container, Nimai wanted to come forward with his truth, which was that early on in our relationship, he had been unfaithful. And it was a lot for me to handle, because part of my trauma as a child was that my dad was unfaithful, of course. So it was kind of the perfect little puzzle piece to just reactivate that and be like, wow, like everybody cheats on me, nobody chooses me first. Like that was the one of my wounds. And the way that I chose to handle that situation was to end our relationship, which was really hard. I mean, we had businesses together, we lived together, all of our friends were just like one big friend group. So, you know, I really just like ripped the tablecloth out from under my life, but I was like, I need to end this relationship, not because I don't love this person or because I think it's impossible to forgive him, but because this is not what is okay. Like, these are my boundaries. You know, I don't want to be in a relationship where cheating is okay. So I ended the relationship, and we took time apart, and we were actually officially broken up for 9 months. But in those 9 months, we did see each other on and off for some periods. Sometimes we would go a period without speaking. And that was when, you know, that really was like the thing that ignited Nimai to be like, I want to be the man that I know I can be, which I'll let him speak on. But, and that was really where he started, like really just went into so much growth. So I'll let you share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we'll backpedal a little bit, because there's a lot. Obviously, we're trying to condense this for this conversation, but condense like a year's worth of events. But for me, whenever I entered this coaching container with these relationship coaches, one of the first things that we talked about was not our relationship. It was my childhood and my past and my history and things that I hadn't talked about I was 29 years old. I'd never even vocalized them out loud, like never spoke the words out loud. And I won't go into too much detail about it, but essentially the story that I had told myself was that it was unsafe to tell the truth. So if that story was so deeply ingrained in my fabric of who I was, it would present itself in many different areas. And the safe thing for me to do was to tell a half-truth, embellish or withhold information. So that's kind of how this pattern had existed through adolescence into early adulthood into us meeting. I was already so deeply kind of like in this pattern that you can't see it. And it's like one of the hardest or like most dangerous lies that you can tell are the lies to yourself. And if you believe those lies, then you're oblivious to the way that you show up. And I'm not trying to absolve myself of responsibility or accountability for the way I showed up then, but that was just kind of where it stemmed from, and I didn't have the awareness of it. So in this container, we talked about that, and so we really worked through a lot of my childhood stuff and saw the relationship between like my childhood and how it was showing up in my romantic relationship. And one of the exercises that they shared with me, they were like, we want you to go through and be as honest as you can be with anything that you've ever like embellished, lied flat out, or told half-truths. So I went deep into my memory bank and started like listing off all of the things that I was not in integrity, or where the areas where I wasn't in integrity. And I brought that to Bianca, and it was like the hardest thing you have to do, because it's not only you have to bring it and you know that what you share is going to really hurt the person that you love, but you also have to confront yourself and be like, wow, I've been not a great person, and I have to like accept that and really own it before I can move forward.
And then it must have even been scary just to do that because of the traumas that you experienced growing up, where it's not safe to tell the truth. So that must have been really hard.
So that was the thing. That was like that was the key to unlock like the person that I really wanted to be, because I knew that there were some things that I could have kept to myself and took with me to the grave. And I had a really honest conversation with myself, and I said, if I do this, then I will always have shame, and I will always not be able to fully love myself for who I am, and I need to speak this truth, even if it means my entire life comes crumbling down, because I need to allow this part of myself to be seen so that I can step forward into becoming the man that I want to be. So I had talked to her and scheduled this meeting with her, and shared with her this infidelity that was the hardest thing for me to do. And she sat there and took it. When I say took it, I mean she thanked me for sharing my truth, even though it really pained her, and it was like obviously very hurtful for her. And her saying that in that way was exactly like the thing that the little boy in me needed to feel loved and unconditionally accepted for making mistakes, for hurting her, even though it wasn't what she wanted to hear.
Yeah, and also, me knowing, because leading up to his like truth telling, I was, he was going through his childhood trauma, things he had never spoken about before, and I knew that one of his deepest wounds was feeling like it was not safe to tell the truth. And also, if you add onto, why is somebody unfaithful? There's so many different reasons, and this reason, another one of his wounds was, a feeling of unworthiness, and like that can show up in kind of seeking attention and love or lust from other people. And so I had an awareness of this. It didn't make receiving that information easier. And like I said, that information was the perfect puzzle piece for my trauma, which was, I'm never somebody's first choice, or I'm always lied to. Like I'm always taken for granted. Like that was my wound. But in that moment when he said, okay, I have to tell you this thing, and I knew what was coming, and it just really felt like my world was crumbling apart, I also knew that if I were to explode with a huge reaction, how could you do this to me, flip the table over, start, throwing things at him. If I did that, all I would be doing is validating his fear that it's not always safe to tell the truth. And unfortunately, there are a lot of cases when you do tell the truth and people meet you with reactions. Of course, when we say it's safe to tell the truth, I can't speak on behalf of every single person in the world, right? But in our particular situation, I knew that I could create safety for him to tell the truth, because whether or not we stay together or we get back together or whatever what was going to happen beyond that point, I wanted him to know that being a person of integrity is far more important than piling lies on top of lies on top of lies to get what you want from people. And me dealing with the pain of feeling like people lie to me or people break my trust, that's a separate thing for me to deal with. That was not for me to deal with right here. And I think that something that I've learned with relationships is when we deal with all of these different problems, a lot of times they all kind of compile and it becomes this like big abstract mess of your trauma and my trauma and then the thing that's happening now and how that's creating trauma in the present moment. And it becomes so overwhelming. But if you can try to just deal with things one chunk at a time. So in this moment, the thing we needed to deal with was his trauma with feeling safe to tell the truth and me creating that safety. So when he told me that, I was unfaithful to you early in our relationship, it broke my heart. And I said, thank you for telling me. And, I was like really upset and I was really disappointed, but, thank you for telling me. The way we kind of look at, not to like compare Nimai to a child, but if a child, and I'm sure you know this, if they do something that's not great, like they break something or they lie or they cheat on a test, but then they come to you and they tell you, okay, Mom, I did this thing and I'm really upset that I did it. And if you say, how could you do that? And you give them some sort of like
extreme reaction,
then that just further validates, okay, I can't tell this person things that are truthful. So in that moment, that was his inner child saying like, okay, it's safe to tell the truth. I have to tell you this thing. And meanwhile, adult Nimai really disappointed me, really did break my heart, but I had to let him know it's safe to tell the truth. Thank you for telling me. And then we can move on to the next thing, which is, okay, the relationship in the present, we can't stay together anymore because I'm glad that you told me that. Thank you. And it also wasn't okay. We had a monogamous agreement when we entered our relationship together. And so I have to end the relationship. And that was really hard too, because I didn't want to, like we had our whole life built together, but I had to do that for myself and for him to, understand that I take my boundaries very seriously. And I think that this is where people who experience infidelity trauma it's really hard when you love someone and you want to be with them and, you live together, maybe you have kids together. There's so many different like components that can make it easy to just say like, okay, like let's, like not break up or like what, whatever. But for me, breaking up was a really important boundary that I had to set. So I did that. And then we were able to move on into like the next thing, which was then me dealing with that pain of like my own self-worth. Okay, well, I felt like I had low self-worth when I was a kid and I found out that my dad cheated on my mom and felt like he cheated on me, right? And then now the person that I love cheated on me. So what does that mean? Does it mean that everybody cheats on me and that I'm unworthy of love? No, I know that that's not what that means. So I had to do my own self-work, and that really didn't involve Nimai, actually. It was really me, my therapist, my support team. I had a coach for a period of time. I read lots of books. I journaled. I meditated. I mean, I was showing up for myself every day, sitting there, sometimes crying for an hour if I had to. And then when it was appropriate for him to support me, I said, hey, I need you to support me in this and what I'm going through. And that was kind of how we started to go through that. And then eventually we found our way back to each other. Which wasn't planned. We fully let go of the relationship, but we found our way back.
Wow, that is such a powerful story, because I keep thinking back to like child Nimai, and I'm thinking to all the parents listening right now how important this message is to remind parents how to respond to your children when they tell the truth, because there are so many adults walking around that have a very similar wound in their heart and have a really hard time telling the truth. I mean, I know a lot of people with that kind of wound where they felt that when they were younger, if they told the truth, and it was scary to do so, and they had their vulnerability and said, I'm going to tell my parents, because they originally trusted their parents, like they're like the number one people that they trust, and then the parents either had an extreme reaction, punishment, discipline, shame, all those things, and it all adds up over time to where they become afraid to tell the truth and feel like it's not safe, and you have to start doing white lies or doing half truths, like you said, and it goes into adulthood, which affects all the relationships in your life, not just your like romantic relationship, but friendship relationships. Then it plays out into relationship with your own kids. And a lot of times our parents have their own set of wounds that they haven't done work to heal from their childhood. And it's like this endless cycle. And that's why I think this conversation of truly doing inner work to heal your wounds, whatever it takes, whether, like you're saying, reading books, doing therapy, and then having that ability and just openness to open your heart to that communication and vulnerability to actually do the work, really goes such a long way. Like, it's like a ripple effect to the next generation.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is how it's how we break generational trauma, essentially.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's a if you look at it that way, you know, pain that may have started generations before you, your great grandparents or whoever, so many generations before you, there's momentum that comes along with each generation. So I like to look at it, or just like use this analogy of like a train, you know, like each generation is a cart on a train, and the more carts it has, the more momentum the more force it's required to stop it from moving or slow it down. So whenever you are chosen by divine or your ancestors, or, you know, make the conscious decision to be the one that stops that generational trauma, it is a lot. Like, it is a big burden to bear. So it's not easy, but on the other side of that, you do break the chain and you break that cycle. For now that I know how to move through these situations, whenever I have children, I'll be able to really instill this like integrity and honesty as a part of who they are from the very beginning, because it's not always like, I'm not even blaming my parents. I really want to make this clear. I don't blame my parents for me having this story. My story is my story, and I somehow formed this story as a protective adaptation for something that happened to me whenever I was a kid. It's not necessarily their fault at all, and I had a lot of shame that I put on top of myself that was preventing me from being authentic, because shame lives in silence. And if you never share it with anybody, nobody really knows the pain that you're holding on to. So part of my thing was also to no longer be available for that shame. So I had to let my parents know too. I had this really tough conversation with them that I recognize now that a lot of the shame that I had was handed to me through them. It wasn't ever mine to begin with. And I let them know I was no longer available for that, and that I'm going to speak my truth whenever I want to. And it was hard for them to hear, but it heals both ways, in both directions. So not only is it healing for me and my future generations, but it heals backwards for my parents as well, because they learned a lot from that conversation too, and were able to accept themselves a lot more and find peace with things that happened in the past as well. So it was a really powerful event for us to happen, that all stemmed from our relationship. And moving forward to whenever we got back together and decided to share this stuff publicly, like, that was a huge step forward for me, because vulnerability was not my strong suit. It was a muscle that I had not exercised at all. So whenever we got back together, we wanted to share what we had learned. And I went into it fully knowing that I was going to be judged online. People were going to have their opinions. Like, anytime you open up your personal relationship to the internet, people are going to have unsolicited opinions, and all day they'll find something to talk about and something to, you know, crucify you for. And I knew that by me sharing my truth, it would give other people, especially men, permission to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to see that it's okay to make a mistake if you own it and you decide to be better moving forward. So that was my thing, was like, how can I live in integrity moving forward? And I'm not ashamed of what I did. It was a painful lesson for everyone involved, but looking back at it now, that painful lesson was, you know,
a catalyst.
It was a catalyst for so much growth in my life, and so much freedom in my life, and hopefully freedom for other people too, because we live in this cancel culture society where somebody makes a mistake and they're done. Doesn't matter what they did before, doesn't matter what they're going to do in the future, they're done. They're forever branded as that, whatever they got canceled for. So I think that people change we have to create a space for opportunity to realize that we're so multifaceted, and there's so much more than just what you see on the surface. So to take something for face value and judge it immediately, like maybe just pause and reflect and ask yourself some questions before you leave that hateful comment, before you jump to some kind of conclusion. Like, we're all humans here, we're all imperfect. Like, nobody that
everyone's
is
just
perfect.
doing their best.
Exactly. Yeah. And when we did open up with this story after we got back together, when we decided to get back together, we started a new relationship. We didn't pick up where we left off. We started a completely new relationship with new boundaries, new rules, new intentions. We spent the whole first year back together, going to therapy, a combined total of 3 times a week. Once a week for myself, once a week for him, and then once a week together.
And we had coaches. And we had coaches.
And we had coaches as well.
Coaches.
I had my own coach. He had his own coach. So we were doing individual, very intentional work, as well as very intentional work together as a couple. We were reading, a lot of books and a lot of material to constantly integrate into our relationship. And when we decided, okay, we want to share this story because we feel like it can help people and it can give people permission to start living in integrity, and also permission for people on the other side of this type of situation, of an infidelity situation, to be strong in their boundaries, and also to not take somebody and just take one thing that they've done and sum that up to who they are, right? And of course, every situation is unique. Are there people who cheat in abusive patterns and know that what they're doing is hurtful and continue to do it regardless? Sure, that's definitely a situation, in which case would be considered really unhealthy. And again, it's like setting that boundary and saying, this is not okay, and I'm leaving this relationship. There's so many different variables, but in our situation, it was something that we chose to handle it the way that we did. And when people online, kind of just see the headline of the podcast and they don't sit and watch the whole thing, and they immediately jump to, once a cheater, always a cheater, I would never take somebody back. That's just, in those comments, I just see their pain, because they feel that they wouldn't be able to forgive themselves if they made a mistake that big, or they've been hurt that deeply and they do not have it in them to hold space for that depth of forgiveness. But when it comes to healing from infidelity, whether you stay with that person or get back together with them or never talk to them again, forgiving them is your key to freedom. If you do not forgive somebody for something that they did to hurt you, and you hold on to that, you're using so much energy inside your body to hold on to this grudge of, I will never forgive somebody for doing that to me. And you will take that into your next relationship and your next relationship, and you'll have a new partner who's never done anything unfaithful to you, and you'll be like, what are you looking at on your phone? Why are you following this person? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Because you start projecting all of that pain that you didn't heal. So I'm really big on forgiveness, and I'm really big on compassion. Obviously, I'm a vegan. Compassion is my thing. And I don't only apply compassion to animals and critters. I apply compassion to human beings as well, meaning that if somebody hurts me and makes a mistake, I let them know that's not okay. But thank you for telling me, and this is how I'm going to move forward from this situation, which might mean our relationship ends, our friendship ends, I need space from you, maybe I never want to talk to you again, but I forgive you. And that's how I chose to heal from it. And I honestly, I can sit here and I can truthfully say that I have healed from this situation, which was really hard because, like I said, directly related to my childhood trauma. And anybody who's been cheated on knows how hard it is. But I truly, we've been able to rebuild trust. I trust other people in my life. I don't live in this constant fear anymore that people are lying to me. I really was able to grow out of that, and forgiveness was really the key to it.
Wow, everything you guys just said, it was so beautiful. From the forgiveness factor to the vulnerability piece that you guys were willing to come out and share. Because for anybody who doesn't know them or their channel, you came out with a video called "We Are Not Your Couple's Goals," and people are like, "What?" And I'm imagining people look up to you a lot in your relationship, and so that must have been extremely vulnerable to share your whole story. But I think it's really beautiful that you saw the goodness that comes out of that, not only from your own relationship and healing your own traumas, but also from being willing to share your story because of how many men, like you said, or women, that could see how you guys grew from that situation instead of living in their shame and their fear, because you were willing to grow and willing to put yourself out there and take a risk and also just hold your child's self and just grow from it. And how many people are afraid to do that? So just seeing that as an example, I'm sure has impacted a lot of people in their relationships.
Yeah. I would say that one episode, we received more messages, like I'm talking about like lengthy DMs and messages than any other piece of content that we've ever put out there.
Yeah, and still it's constant. I mean, everywhere we go, we meet people that say, "Oh, I listened to that podcast and it really helped me because, you know, I was unfaithful or I was cheated on, and now I was able to have more understanding," because it's a topic that, you know, like you mentioned, people don't like to talk about it because it's not a pretty subject to talk about, but it's really important, and people do make mistakes and people can change. And so I'm glad that we, you know, have been able to talk about it, and now we're at a point in our relationship where we have so much trust and love, and it really is a new relationship. When we talk about the past, we refer to it as the old relationship. We don't say, "Oh yeah, remember that time." We say, "Remember that time in the old relationship." Like we really kind of segment it. Like it is a part of our love story, but it's also not we're not the same people that we were right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a takeaway from this is that like vulnerability and honesty is the key to so many of our issues, so many of our inner problems, and how hard it was for you, and just seeing how you healed that trauma. And I love that you said that you don't blame your parents for it. You look at your experience with your parents with empathy from their own experiences as well. But I keep going back to children because it's generational. Like you said, it helps the past by being open and honest, talking to your parents, but also with future generations. And I know you guys don't have kids, but the book The Conscious Parent is really amazing by Shefali Saberi. I had her on my podcast. And it all comes back down to you. And you know how a lot of parents will be like, "Okay, I need a book to like how to fix my child. Why is my kid throwing tantrums? How do I fix it? How do I stop my kid from doing this or that?" And I'm like, I love the respectful parenting books because it always just turns it back on you. What are you doing? What are you doing that can shift? Instead of being like, my child, my this, my that, what they need to do, it turns it back on you and how you can grow. Because when you're willing to grow and change yourself, it has a ripple effect on everybody and every relationship around you.
Yeah.
I like, you're so right. Because every pattern, it takes two to tango. Right? Every pattern that exists in a relationship is co-created. You have a role and they have a role. It's not 100% on them. It's not 100% on you. It's always shared responsibility. So you can never control what somebody else does. Like you'll never be able to control how somebody shows up or how they respond, but you can always take accountability and take control for how you decide to respond to something. So in every situation where you're feeling activated or triggered, or you notice that there's a pattern that's existing and you find yourself pointing the finger at the other person, a much more effective technique would be like, okay, point it in and use your eye and really like turn it inward and say like, how am I contributing to this pattern, this cycle that exists between me and my partner? Because it's not you versus them. That's a huge misconception. It's not me versus you. It's me and you versus the pattern. And how can we both, we're on the same team here, how can we both do what we need to in order to dissolve this pattern? And oftentimes that comes down to saying the hard things, to really the degree of like the depth of your intimacy is directly proportional to how many uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have with your partner. And in any relationship, if you are holding up a mask and you have a mask and you're constantly engaging with your partner and they have a mask, then technically there's 4 people in the relationship. So it's like, it's only once we remove those masks that you really get to understand and meet the person that you're engaging with and deepen that sense of intimacy. And oftentimes it's on the other side of those hard, truthful conversations.
So this is kind of getting into like conscious relationships. And I know you guys talk about how you're in a conscious relationship. So for people who are listening who are interested in this and they're like, yeah, I could really use a lot more vulnerability, openness, honesty, and growth in my relationship. What is a conscious relationship and how do you embark on that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I would call a conscious relationship a relationship that is intentional by all of the parties involved, meaning that when you get into the relationship and you decide, okay, we're doing this, we're with each other in whatever capacity that means, that it's intentional. It's not just, okay, I like you and you like me and we're just gonna, see where this goes, but rather, not saying that you can't go with the flow, but okay, we're gonna go with the flow, we're gonna see where this goes, but also these are my intentions for myself and these are my intentions for the relationship, right? And moving about that in the most conscious way you can. So for us, when we got back together and we started this new relationship, which is, a conscious relationship, we went into it saying, okay, what are our intentions for the relationship, for the long term, for the short term, for ourselves? Individually, I want to grow. I want to continue breaking, because even though I feel like I've broken my people pleaser patterns, of course, every now and then it rears its head, right? So I'm going to keep working on myself so that I can be as authentic as possible, as confident as possible, as honest as possible, and we can show up with integrity. And I want to have the type of relationship where I can show up in this way, right? You're very conscious of the way that you're acting. You're conscious of the trauma or the emotional baggage that you bring in, and you every day, whenever there's, like, let's say there's a little bit of tension, like your partner did something to upset you, instead of just rolling your eyes and leaving and going to the gym and just avoiding them completely, or maybe just not talking about it and waiting until you cool down and moving on, you say, hey, I notice that you're upset with me, and whenever you're ready, I would really like to have a conversation about this because it doesn't feel good for me to know that you're upset. So when you're ready, I'm here to talk. And then maybe the other person might say something like, thanks for acknowledging my feelings. I'm not ready to talk right now. Let's reconvene in an hour. That's how a conscious couple goes about problems, instead of just ignoring them until they go away, because they don't go away. It's like literally like a cartoon animal sweeping something under a rug, and then there's like a big lump in the rug, and then you trip on it. That's what people do, and that's what we've been taught to do, because unfortunately we're not taught how to relate to each other. So that's how I define a conscious relationship. And I don't know if you want to share what your definition is. It's kind of similar.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that she said, and I would add to that just really having a framework to navigate conflict, because that was, again, it's not really something that we're taught. It's something that we learn by witnessing other people, and most oftentimes our parents. So how did they handle conflict? Well, my dad raised his voice, he yelled, he gaslit, and my mom just shut down. And like that was the pattern that I saw. So naturally, as a boy, I adopted some of those qualities. And now whenever we have a conflict, it, like she said, we don't avoid it, we face it head on, but we have tools to navigate those conflicts. Whenever she shares whatever she has to share, I validate what her experience by saying, like, okay, so what I'm hearing, like, mirroring it. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you're upset because X, Y, and Z. So she knows that I hear what she's really trying to communicate. And if I say it incorrectly, she'll say, like, yes, and this, and that. So that's like one part of like the conflict resolution. And then, I share my experience, and then she says the same thing. And what that does is it diffuses, it depersonalizes the entire situation, because it can feel so much like a personal attack. And every conflict is different. I'm just, that sometimes it can be a personal attack, but most of the time it's just a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And what we do is now we have a framework to operate within that will allow us to understand each other better, and not allow these conflicts to like last a day, or we'll go to sleep angry, or it'll be like a whole week where there's just tension between us. We're like, I can't stand this tension between us. It's uncomfortable, but let's just talk about it here and now.
Yeah. And I would say, as far as how to embark on a conscious relationship, I would say one is to constantly check in with yourself to know what you're bringing into the relationship. So if you don't know, if you have no idea what your trauma may be, or what your experiences from the past that have created patterns that you're bringing with you, maybe seeing a talk therapist or hiring a life coach, somebody that you can start to talk to just one-on-one, so you can identify, okay, I didn't realize that I tell a lot of white lies. Oh, I don't really like that about myself. Or I have a pattern of being really secretive about things that I'm shameful of, or I have a pattern of getting really uncomfortable around the topic of sex, and so I just avoid it completely. Whatever those things are, you need to first identify those things in yourself. So doing the work on your own, therapy, journaling, working with a coach, reading books, and getting really, really honest with yourself. So that's a requirement by both of the parties. And then the other thing, conflict resolution, just like what Nimai said, and what he, gave an example of is essentially mirroring and naming the feelings. So if you can first learn how to name your feelings, this will just transform all of your relationships. This is the biggest thing, and this is something that, I know in conscious parenting, it's like learning teaching your kids how to identify their feelings. Like, I feel frustrated, or I feel shameful, or I feel happy. Like, learning how to identify those feelings. We're not taught how to do that as children, or at least our generation wasn't, unfortunately. And so doing that will just change your life, all of your relationships, not just your romantic one. So whenever you feel, okay, my partner didn't do something that he promised. He was supposed to plan a date night and he didn't do it, and I feel really upset. Instead of waiting until he says, hey, what's wrong? Saying, well, I don't know. I just feel like you don't care about me and you don't ever take initiative and it's all I really want. Your partner might be like, whoa, okay, you're upset about so much. I literally made one mistake. Yeah. Right? So naming your feelings would look like saying, okay, it's also checking in with yourself first again. Okay, I feel upset, I feel sad, I feel forgotten. Like, that's if you can condense it to one word or just a couple words, I feel forgotten because you were supposed to do this thing, you promised you would do this thing and you didn't. And if you can also identify how you can relate that back to your childhood, I feel forgotten, which reminds me of how my parents used to never celebrate my birthday. And so I feel like I've been forgotten my whole life. Now your partner has context to understand why making that one small mistake is so impactful for you. And that will just change, just completely change your relationship. And then the mirroring piece is just when your partner says that, I feel forgotten, you just say it back to them. And all that does is it lets them know that you're listening, so then they feel like they're not being ignored. If you're looking at your phone or if you're just nodding your head, kind of staring out into space, they're like, you're not even listening. I don't, now they don't feel heard. So just saying, I hear you, you feel forgotten, and it relates back to how your parents used to make you feel forgotten. I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. Let's move forward. What can I do to help you not feel forgotten and feel seen?
And it's so much easier to heal from an experience like that when the other person is holding space for you like that. And because it's easy when you're upset to be like, you're this, and start name calling or attacking instead of identifying the feeling that you're feeling. And it's so true what you said about kids, because as they're figuring out their emotions, they're going to mirror how they see adults, for one, reacting and getting upset, but there's also themselves just trying to show their anger and show why they're feeling sad or frustrated or upset or hurt or angry. And so they might start throwing things or slamming doors or yelling or saying names and stuff. And instead of just punishing the child for reacting in a way that is not desirable, instead going up to them and say, you're feeling really mad right now. Can you say, I feel so mad right now? Instead of saying, I hate you, and I hate my brother. You could say, I'm so mad right now. I'm so mad that he did that. And just identifying those feelings goes such a long way. And in the romantic relationship, completely, because it's so easy to just blow up at your partner because you've been holding it all day.
Yeah, and then you start telling them this whole essay of things that they've done wrong, and they're like, whoa, I just forgot to take the trash out. It's not that big of a deal. And then
you're holding on to all last week's everything that I did wrong.
Exactly. Just naming it, just if you can put a label on that feeling, it will really, really transform the way that you move through your emotions, as well as the way your partner can understand you and how you guys can tackle things. And then, like you mentioned, it's great for kids as well. And I love watching videos on conscious parenting, because I'm not a parent yet, but one day I will be. So I love seeing how there is a whole new wave of really conscious parenting happening, where people can allow their children to have their feelings validated. Like, you're mad right now, that's okay. Being mad.
It's okay to be mad.
Yeah, it's okay. It's part of being a human. Good job.
I get mad sometimes too, just relating to that person. And I love what you said about the sweeping under the rug, of how just because there's another analogy from a book that I read called His Needs, Her Needs, and it's pretty old school traditional, so I don't love certain parts about it, but there's certain parts I really, really love. I mean, I love traditional aspects too, but it's just the way that some of the parts in the book is, labels like females versus males, right, when it could totally be swapped, even though, just to clarify, the book does acknowledge that it could be swapped. It really just depends on each relationship. But Just clarifying that.
Yeah.
But what I love about the book is it talks about the love bank. And it's similar to what you're saying about sweeping under the rug. And I think a lot of people don't really realize or kind of forget about how all relationships, when they start with that spark and that excitement and that just total like over the moon for each other, those endorphins are high. It's literally like a drug. Like you can't, like you're in this total other altered state where when you see that person, everything about you is just like addicted, loving, just so into it. It affects your whole mood, your day, everything. And as the relationship prolongs and settles, it settles a little bit. And sometimes people expect all relationships to just be on that ultimate high in the very beginning forever. And so then it's easy to move on and be like, oh, well, now that we're experiencing all these issues, right, it's easy to be like, well, we're just not in love anymore because it wasn't how it was in the very beginning. When really what's happened is that endorphin high that happens in the very, very beginning relationship has settled, and now all of the issues are starting to come to the front, to the top of your own issues and how you respond to each other. So instead of being like, oh, now I'm going to look for that next high, that next super high, and just move on because trouble's starting to happen in a relationship or uncomfortableness, instead facing on head on with what you're going through and learning how to heal from that goes such a long way. And learning like love languages, it's kind of like the love language book, the 5 love languages, but it goes a step further and notice it and expands to like 10 specific needs, and we have certain ones that are more important to us than others depending on each person. So there's like the love coin, the love bank at the beginning of your relationship, and everything you're doing is like you're being your best self. You're putting forth your best foot forward to be your best version of yourself to the person that you're just so excited about. And then once it settles down, you just often kind of let that go, and you're like these things that aren't so desirable about you start to show up, and then you start not treating them in the way you maybe did in the beginning. And so in the beginning you're adding all these coins to the bank, and then as time goes on, if you aren't careful and conscious of how you're treating your partner, you're going to start doing things that take coins out of your bank. So everything you do with your partner is either adding love or taking away from love. So how you react to things, like kind of like what you said, if you're coming to them with like a issue and you're feeling upset and they're just on their phone or acting like, why are you even getting into this? I don't want to talk about this, or dismissing your feelings. That is taking a coin out of the bank. And eventually if you take all those coins out, there's nothing left. So that I just really like that.
We actually use that analogy as well with the deposits or with
withdrawals
deposits and withdrawals. So sometimes if we're feeling, like our love bank has had a lot of deposits and not enough, a lot of withdrawals and not enough deposits, we'll mention it to each other and just say, hey, I feel like we've been doing a lot of withdrawals lately. We've been having a lot of heavy conversations. Like we had a fight the other day. Like we really need to put some deposits, and it can help you to have some more, clear intentions of, okay, we need to put some deposits in. Like let's plan a date night. Like let's plan a beach day with our phones turned off, and just so we can spend time getting back into that like feel good feeling.
Yeah, let's do a picnic, let's take a bath. Like we have all these things that we know are deposits that we both love to do, and it creates intimacy, and that is what puts more in the bank account, or puts more in our relationship bank account. And also back to the conscious relationship part, I was thinking about if I would like to add anything, and
go.
I would. I think that one big part of it is not expecting your partner to fill your needs, and really taking ownership of you are your own whole complete person, and it's not their responsibility to make you happy, it's their responsibility to add to your own happiness. So it's not their job to fill you up whenever you feel drained. Like it's always your responsibility to do that for yourself, and not project that onto them, because I feel like what you just mentioned of in the beginning of a relationship, it's all love and butterflies and it's all great things, and that person now might have an expectation of this person has to do all these things for me until the end of time, or else I'm not going to be happy. That's not how it works. Every relationship takes work, but
it's
codependency, but first and foremost, it takes you to do the work on yourself, and then you always have to show up to the relationship with your best foot forward, and that is what ultimately makes a really successful relationship, because if not, you fall into the trap of these unspoken expectations which then can lead to resentment, which then can lead to deeper issues within the relationship.
And that's where the unspoken aspect is so key, because we can have these expectations, right, from our partner, and when they're not doing that and you're like, well, they must not love me, when really a lot of it is just lack of communication and how you receive love best. So you might be like, I'm taking out the trash and I'm putting all the kids to bed by myself and I'm cleaning all the dishes, like, why don't you feel loved? Like, this is how I show my love. And you're like, well, that's great. I love that you do that, and I don't want you to stop doing that. But like, what really helps me, what makes me feel the most loved is through your words or through your quality time.
Yeah.
Like, whatever that aspect. That's why I love the 5 love languages part. But what you said is so key about like centering for yourself, and not like the codependency part is so pivotal too in that component, because so many people do get codependent and expect that their partner is what makes them happy, when that's not the reality at all. So what books do you guys recommend for couples, maybe from someone who's experienced infidelity, or they're wanting to work on their relationship, or just relationship books in general that you guys have found really helpful?
Yeah, for somebody who has experienced infidelity and been on the side of being cheated on, I would recommend a book called Transcending Post-Infidelity Stress Disorder. So Transcending PISD. The doctor's name slips my memory at the moment, but that's a really helpful book. It talks about, post-infidelity stress disorder is a real thing. It's really traumatic. So that kind of talks about how to deal with it, whether or not you want to reignite a relationship with that person or not. I think that's a really helpful book.
Yeah, I would say I also read the book. Like whenever she found it and told me that she was reading it. This is whenever we were broken up too.
Yeah, we were.
I read it because I wanted to know what I could do to help her healing process as well. And even I learned, being the one that cheated or the one that was unfaithful, I learned about myself through that book too, because it also talks about things that I had never considered might affect my perspective on relationships. And one of them was like, were your parents unfaithful? Like, does that have any role in how you show up or how you see the sanctity of your relationship? And it was just really eye-opening. So that is a great book for anybody that has experienced it, even as a kid. It's not just within a romantic relationship. Is like you can have that PISD from childhood as well, which is really it was new to me, so maybe it'll be new to somebody else. And the other one that I would really recommend is
Getting the Love You Want.
Getting the Love You Want. I don't know if you've read that one too. It's really good. So it's written by these licensed couple therapists who they're kind of pioneered the field of Imago therapy, which Imago is essentially the compository image that we create as a child that has all of our unmet childhood needs and all of the qualities that our primary caretakers had, both the positive and the negative qualities that we unconsciously seek to reconcile as an adult. So if you find yourself in a relationship and you find yourself saying like, oh, this person reminds me of my mom, there's some truth to that, because you are naturally drawn to the qualities that your mother may have had, the nice ones. You might also be drawn to the not so great qualities that your mother embodied, and subconsciously project your partner to provide you with the things that your mother never did. So in my experience, in my personal, my childhood, my mother suffered from mental health issues, and I consistently found myself in relationship with women who suffered from like diagnosed depression, and I never understood why, and also suicidal ideation or suicidal tendencies. And I did not know how to respond in those situations. I went shut down straight into child mode, or whatever adaptations I learned as a kid to deal with my mother being in those situations. So now as an adult, I didn't know how to navigate those. And it wasn't until we started really uncovering and unpacking our childhood is when I shared with her about my mom and the severity of what I experienced as a kid, or just the impact that those events had on me as a kid, and learning how to navigate when I get activated, or learning how to come forward and share how I'm feeling whenever I was a kid. But it made so much sense, and that book really does a great job of learning how to learn more about yourself and how to understand each other's maybe childhood wounds and how to navigate those really challenging conversations.
Yeah. Getting the love you want is definitely like a top. Like, I feel like every couple should read that book.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. And I love that you read the book on infidelity that was meant for the one who had been cheated on, because it helps you come to a place where you can empathize and start to try to relate to what the other person experienced. That's ultimately what it's all about when it comes to how you choose your relationships and to trying to empathize with your partner and all of it. So I think that's a really big key component. So to kind of end off, something I've seen you say is that relationships are an opportunity to grow deeper within ourselves. So what advice would you give your younger self about relationships that you wish you knew before?
Oh man, so much. I wish my younger self could listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
I would say that that honesty is so valuable, and what that means really is not just being honest with the other, but being honest with yourself. Because even though I really valued honesty, and for me, I was the type of person who was like, I've never cheated in a relationship before. I don't lie. I hate lying, but I was a massive people pleaser. So I was lying in a way. I was sacrificing things that I wanted to do because of what my partner, my past partners, what they wanted for me. And so, I had a pretty long-term relationship before I even met Nimai, where my partner did not like what I posted on Instagram. He didn't like the way I dressed, and I completely changed who I was for this person. And at the same time was like, I'm an honest person with integrity, but I was lying to myself. I was suppressing who I was for another person. So I would just really say that, honesty is so valuable, and that doesn't just mean being honest with people and with your words. It means being honest with yourself. Like, be your most authentic, radically honest self first and foremost, and show up into all relationships that way.
Love it.
Yeah, you stole what I was going to say. Just authentic expression. If you show up as your fully authentic self, the moment you meet somebody, they know what they're going to get. But if you show up as this version of yourself that's trying to put on a front, that's trying to make them like you, it's going to become exhausting to try to keep that up for long term, and it's going to unravel eventually. So it may be hard. You might feel like it's harder to find a partner, but what that's doing is that instead of making you trying to be liked by everybody, you're attracting the right person into your life that likes you for you in all of your quirks, in all of your imperfections, in all of your things that you thought other people might find unattractive. Those are the redeeming qualities that this person finds attractive in you.
Yeah.
So if you could be that from the beginning, then I think that's going to set you up for a really successful, deeply intimate relationship that'll last.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to even just what we were saying about when you're in that height of the beginning of the relationship, that you're trying to just, be the best version and to help them fall in love with you because you're so in love with them. It's just like a natural reaction almost because you're just so like enamored with that person. But there's a balance of like being your best self versus being somebody that you're not.
Yeah, definitely.
That's definitely going to change, like fall into trouble as you get older or as it goes on. This was so amazing. I appreciate everything you guys shared, and I think it's all so helpful, and I appreciate your vulnerability. So where can people find you guys? I know you have your own podcast that people should definitely check out, so maybe just share that so people can continue to like learn from your guys' experiences.
Yeah, my podcast is the Bianca Taylor podcast, which I have an episode with you coming out soon on parenting and vegan stuff, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
And we have all other episodes on relationships as well there. And I'm on Instagram, Bianca Taylor M, TikTok, Bianca Taylor M, and I'm also, my podcast is also on YouTube, which is Bianca Taylor Fit.
Perfect.
Yeah, same. Just Nimai Delgado on everything. Nimai Delgado YouTube, podcast, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of the stuff. So pretty easy to find. There's not too many Nimais out there. So as long as you just search my name, you'll find me.
I know. And you guys have been vegan a long time. People who like maybe are just learning about you. You've never eaten meat, right? In your whole life.
Yeah. I was born into a vegetarian family and then went vegan back in 2015. So over 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago now.
How about you? How long have you
I've been
guys-
vegan for about 9 years.
And did you guys get together? When did you guys get together?
We met when I had already
2017.
been 2017. So I had been vegan for a couple of years already when we
And
met.
you weren't vegan yet.
I was.
Oh, you were
Yeah,
vegan.
I was.
Oh,
So we're-
2017. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we were both vegan, which also made our relationship
I mean, that's
very
why-
compatible.
Oh, well, you bonded.
That's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
we met. Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
met because
Yeah.
we were vegan and we were like, cool, vegan
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Whereas like
Yeah.
Andrew and I, you know, neither of us were vegan or plant-based at the time. So
Yeah.
we started when we were 15 and 16. And then I came to him one day when I was 19, like, babe, I'm going to go vegan. And he's like, what? And then a few years later, he ended up going vegan too.
And that's actually something that we talk about quite a bit, is one partner in a relationship wanting to go vegan or already vegan and their partner is not, and like how to navigate those conversations. And it's something that a lot of people do deal with, unfortunately. Like, I love this person, but there's this like fundamental part of myself that I can't violate, you know, within myself.
With
So,
your
but I
ethics,
really
yeah.
want them to see the world the way I do. And it's like, yeah, that's something that's challenging for a lot of people.
Have
so.
you guys done an episode on that? Because that's
No,
a really interesting topic.
No, I think we should.
Not fully, but
yeah,
we
help our
yeah,
clients with
we
it.
will.
We've
Yeah.
talked about it many times, but I think it does deserve its own episode.
Yeah, because it goes within the conscious relationship aspect that, like, you really can't change anybody. Like, you can't change someone. All you can do is work on yourself and be your best, like, be the best example that you can
totally.
be. But navigating the thought process of, like, especially if you're already together and then
Yeah.
you become vegan, the other isn't interested. It's such an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, I'm sure we could keep going, but
I know.
we're going to end it here. And thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming out.
Thank
I
you.
am so happy with how this went. And I just love everything you guys have to share.
Yeah, thank you for having
Thanks so
us.
much for having us on,
Okay,
Ellen.
bye.